Racist cop. Kicks black woman in court, then freezes when she turns out to be his new police chief. A police officer can kick a black woman out of her seat in a courtroom, but when she's about to become his superior, the entire system will pay the price. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. On Monday morning, the sky above Greenville, North Carolina, was draped in a pale gray hue, thick and heavy like the tension simmering within those making their way to the federal courthouse. Clouds hung low above the domed roof, not quite ready to rain, but ominous enough to signal that something was coming. At 527 Oakland Street, home to courtroom 4B, crowds gathered as though they weren't just attending a hearing, but awaiting a historic reckoning. Amidst the throng, standing out without seeking attention, was a black woman, medium build, dressed in a navy suit that hugged her firm frame, her hair neatly tied back at the nape. She didn't hurry, didn't glance around, only moved forward with steady steps in charcoal flats, her left hand cradling a black folder embossed with a striking emblem, a silver-etched scale of justice belonging to no private law firm. No one knew who she was, but Callista Carter didn't need them to. Callista was neither a defendant nor a lawyer. Her name wasn't listed on the morning's court schedule. But the moment she set foot on the granite-tiled hallway, one thing became clear. She hadn't come to observe a case. She had come to observe the entire system. Inside courtroom 4B, fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on the worn wooden bench of the judge's podium. The pew-like benches, steeped in age and the scent of old varnish, were already filled. But Callista chose a seat at the very back, near the exit, quiet and unobtrusive. No one turned to look at her, except for an elderly couple murmuring about a woman who might be a prosecutor. She wore no badge, said nothing aloud, but the way she sat upright, eyes fixed, as she flipped through documents, stirred curiosity. What they didn't know was that this woman had once served as Director of Strategic Reform for the Missouri State Police, where she led sweeping overhauls across 3 major departments, including Memphis, where she had helped cut civil complaints over police misconduct by more than 60% in less than a year. But today, Callista wasn't here in that capacity. She had come quietly, without alerting the mayor, without notifying the county office, simply to witness firsthand what had sparked an internal firestorm in confidential reports over the past 2 months. Racially biased misconduct by several mid-level officers, led by one name, Liam Walker. At the same time, just 10 steps to her right, Officer Liam Walker, 42 years old, once praised as the best courtroom enforcer in the county, let his gaze casually drift toward Callista. He scanned her from head to toe, his look steeped in the practiced indifference of a man used to judging without evidence, without context. He didn't recognize her, just as the system he served had long failed to recognize the full story behind every black face it passed judgment on. But this time, they picked the wrong person to misjudge. And that mistake, within just a few hours, would shake the very institution they believed untouchable. Liam Walker had stood in a police uniform for 17 years. A local newspaper once described him as the pillar of courtroom order, but if anyone had cared to flip to the other side of that praise, they would have found a record stained with blemishes. In the past 6 years alone, Liam had been named in 12 civil complaints, including aggressive conduct toward people of color, using racially charged language while on duty, and once pulling a firearm in a situation that didn't call for it. Not once was he prosecuted, thanks to his close ties with Commissioner Richard Halderman, a man who publicly stated he didn't trust accusations from kids raised in black neighborhoods. That morning, as Liam's gaze swept across the courtroom, He immediately zeroed in on the black woman seated quietly at the end of the bench, calm, silent, with no name badge. Something in his instincts fired. She doesn't belong, doesn't fit the mold. She wasn't like the people he was used to dealing with. No shouting, no shrinking in fear. She was too calm, too composed, and that irritated him. Without checking her credentials, without asking a single question, Liam marched over, his voice soaked in hollow authority. This seat's for people involved in the case. This isn't a place to hang out. Callista looked up, her eyes locking with his for a brief, icy second. She gave a slight smile, the kind worn by someone who knows exactly what she's dealing with, and even more precisely, who she is. I'm here on an internal assignment. I'm just observing, not interfering with anyone, she said, her voice soft, but unbowed. Liam scoffed. In his eyes was visible contempt, and a second later, he kicked the edge of Callista's seat hard, shifting it sideways and knocking the folder from her lap. Papers scattered to the floor, like shot birds falling mid-flight. For a moment, the courtroom froze. No one said a word. An elderly woman in the front row gripped her husband's hand in shock, but didn't dare turn around. A young attorney arranging case files paused, then quickly bent his head again, pretending not to have seen anything. Liam, lips curled in a smug grin, muttered under his breath, "Black folks always think they're judges." He turned away, didn't look back. As if he'd just completed another routine, no one dared question. But what he didn't know was that the woman he had just humiliated had the authority to strip that badge from his chest with a single signature. Callista bent down and picked up each page. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes weren't filled with anger, only a silence etched deep. When the last sheet was placed back into her folder, she pulled out a red pen, wrote a short line, and tucked it between the documents. 0924. Use of force without justified cause. Passive witnesses. No courtroom response. And at that moment, in a room where every pair of eyes had chosen to look away, a silent reckoning had begun. Not with guns, not with handcuffs, but with observation, with strategic silence, and with a will forged from decades of carrying burdens that men like Liam would never have to understand. The woman who had just been kicked and humiliated in open court, no one knew, had once sat in shadowed rooms where the FBI held closed-door meetings, mapping out some of the most complex internal corruption networks in the American South. Her name was Callista Carter, and she never went anywhere merely to observe. Callista once served as Deputy Director of Homeland Security for the state of Missouri, coordinating insider crackdowns within police departments across St. Louis, Jefferson City, and Cape Girardeau, 3 epicenters of abuse of power and protected misconduct. It was she who had collaborated with senior FBI agents to dismantle a budget embezzlement ring worth more than $2.3 million within Missouri's law enforcement back in 2019. Beyond her experience, Callista carried academic weight. She earned a master's degree in criminal psychology and organizational behavior from Northwestern University, with a thesis titled "The Psychological Structure of Toxic Power in Law Enforcement." That thesis later became official training material for over 60 police departments nationwide. In 2022, the U.S. Department of Justice honored her internally as the Silence Breaker, recognizing her efforts to expose 11 cases of internal file suppression at the Kansas City Police Department. She wasn't just strong, she had the rare ability to see through facades, to identify those who wore the badge but lacked the character. And now, her assignment in Greenville was no ordinary investigation. According to a confidential report sent to the Justice Department's Oversight Office, the Greenville Police Department ranked 4th in the nation for racial discrimination complaints, with 62% of internal allegations filed by officers or staff of color. Just last year, there were 19 formal complaints of racial misconduct, 17 of which were dismissed for lack of evidence, even when supported by audio recordings. Notably, the name Liam Walker appeared indirectly in 9 of those cases, always coincidentally involved, but with no direct proof of wrongdoing. Commissioned by the Justice Department and backed fully by the sitting mayor, Callista was appointed as the new police chief of Greenville. But at her request, the official announcement would be withheld until 3 p.m. that afternoon. She wanted to see firsthand how the organization behaved when it didn't know it was being watched. No badge, no entourage, no press release. Callista appeared at the courthouse like a phantom to witness the unfiltered truth. And Liam Walker, with his smug posture and gaze steeped in prejudice, unwittingly became the first field test. A test he failed miserably, with his actions, his own words, and his blind arrogance. But Callista didn't just record his behavior. She observed the entire room. She noted who looked away, who flinched, who bowed their heads, who stayed silent. And from that, she began to shape the list of those who would remain, and those who would be removed from this institution forever. If you want to change a system, you don't start with the weak. You don't start with slogans. You start with the one who believes he is above the law. With an officer like Liam Walker, with polished shoes, a gleaming name tag, and a mind hollowed by bias. And he had no idea that the moment his foot struck that chair this morning was the moment he kicked open the door that would lead to his permanent dismissal. At 2:58 p.m., the 6th floor of the Greenville Police Department was packed to capacity. Plastic chairs had been added along the hallway, and ceiling fans spun at full speed, yet they couldn't dispel the thick air of anticipation. In past routine meetings, many officers arrived late or just showed up out of obligation. But today was different, because today, someone new was about to walk into that room, and with their arrival, everything they once knew was about to change. Rumors had been swirling for 2 weeks. Whispers among staff said that the incoming chief wasn't one of their own, but rather an outsider. Someone without old ties. Someone untouched by the hidden power circles within the department. Some even speculated that the new commander would be from Washington or Atlanta, a reform specialist, someone sent to cut out the rot mercilessly. In the corner of the second row, Liam Walker, his uniform still crisply pressed, leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, holding a cup of coffee like a theater-goer watching a private show. He laughed loudly, unbothered, retelling to a group of younger officers behind him the events from the courtroom that morning. I told that lady straight up. No badge, not on the case file, just sitting there, taking up space. I said, "This is a courtroom, not a cafe for bored black women." And guess what? She didn't say a damn word. A few awkward chuckles rippled from the group, not strong enough to signal agreement, but not weak enough to resist. A young lieutenant nearby pressed his lips tight. Someone checked their watch, counting down the minutes just to escape the moment. Liam didn't realize that, as he repeated each slur, he was digging another inch into the grave of his reputation. 3 p.m. The double door swung open. A mayoral advisor stepped in first, clutching a thick folder, his voice firm and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to welcome the mayor of Greenville, Mr. Terrence Holbrook." The entire room shot to their feet almost in unison. Liam stood too, his face barely masking a bored expression. To him, every leadership meeting was the same. Some flowery speeches, a few hollow pledges, and then back to business as usual. What he didn't know was that today would be a different chapter. the final chapter of his own story. The mayor stepped up to the podium, composed. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the room. Today, it is my great honor to introduce a courageous leader, someone with proven experience in state-level reform, and more importantly, someone who believes that the dignity of law enforcement lies in integrity. He paused briefly, opened the folder, then looked up. Please welcome our new chief of police, Callista Carter. The room fell silent, as if all the air had been sucked out. Heads turned sharply toward the door. Footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, authoritative. And then Callista appeared, not in the Navy suit from that morning, but in a command uniform with 4 gleaming silver bars on her shoulders, the chief's badge pinned proudly on her chest, reflecting steel under the light. She walked past the rows of chairs, each step tearing apart the distance between those who dared to speak the truth and those who only knew how to stay silent. No one said a word. Those standing didn't dare sit. Those seated barely breathed. Someone pulled out a phone, hand trembling, intending to take a photo, then thought better of it. Liam Walker froze. His eyes widened so much that it looked like the lids might tear. His breath grew short. His complexion drained from pink to pale, then purple within seconds. He blinked repeatedly, trying to convince himself this couldn't be the same woman he'd humiliated that morning. But it was her. Callista Carter, the woman he called some black lady who thinks she's a judge. Callista Carter, who now stood at the center of the room, was saying nothing, yet making every chair suddenly feel unsteady beneath its occupant. Her eyes locked onto him, not with rage, not with disdain, but with a calm, piercing stare as cold as steel. In those eyes was justice, a sharp memory, a silent sentence that needed no judge to deliver. And in that moment, Liam Walker was no longer a police officer. He just didn't know it yet. As Callista Carter stepped up to the podium, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. There was no slideshow, no signage, no aides adjusting her microphone. She didn't carry papers, nor did she glance down at any notes. All she brought was her voice, and the truth. It wasn't a loud voice, but every word was clear, firm, like the steady strike of a judge's gavel on a granite desk. We don't wear this uniform just to project authority. We wear it to represent justice, or to represent rot. That sentence felt like an arrow striking the softest point of the room, straight into the spine that had for too long been bent by self-interest and silence. Callista held her head high, her gaze scanning each face. She didn't need to raise her voice. Each word peeled away the layers of pretense this department had wrapped around itself. I've seen an officer shove an elderly man to the ground just because he couldn't hear a command. I've handled a captain who used a rubber baton to punish a student for wearing a hoodie to school. She paused for a beat. Then, in a voice tight with emotion, but not weakness, she shared. 4 years ago, a black boy, 10 years old, named Malik. An officer in Franklin stripped him down on the street because he suspected the boy was carrying drugs. There were no drugs, but there was humiliation. 2 months later, the boy took his own life. His mother placed a police uniform in his casket, not to honor him, but to bury the very thing that stole his childhood. The room thickened with silence. A few officers bowed their heads. Some clenched their fists. One bit their lip. Another's eyes welled with tears. And one began to tremble. Callista didn't shout, but she made each person feel as if they had been stripped bare in front of a mirror. Then, without warning, she opened a folder already placed on the podium. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a statement of ethics. It was a suspension order. Officer Liam Walker stepped forward. The room tilted under the weight of silence. Liam froze. It took him nearly 10 seconds to move his legs, and each step toward the front felt like walking to the guillotine. Each movement was a betrayal of himself, a living confirmation of everything Callista had just said. When he reached the podium, Callista looked him straight in the eyes. There was no anger, no contempt, only the cold gaze of someone executing a sentence that needed no court to pronounce. Under Article 18B of Greenville's Professional Conduct Code, I hereby suspend Officer Liam Walker, effective immediately. Grounds: abuse of authority, racial discrimination, and breach of professional ethics during this morning's court session. The faint rustle of paper sounded as she held the order out before him. But before he could take it, she continued. This time, her voice sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. This is not your first offense. Your file contains 7 unresolved complaints, 3 involving victims under the age of 18. There was no whispering, no squeaking chairs. The room slipped into a state of stillness, like wild animals realizing the predator had stepped into their midst. A middle-aged officer in the front row gave a slight nod. An Asian American woman near the back sat up straighter. No applause was needed, but the energy of solidarity began to grow, quietly, like weeds pushing through concrete. Liam's hands trembled as he took the document, his lips moving. He was trying to say something. A defense, maybe, or one final blow. But Callista spoke softly. You no longer have the right to speak. And in that moment of absolute silence, everyone in that room understood. A new era had just begun. The silence following the announcement of Liam Walker's suspension hadn't yet lifted when Callista Carter turned to the next page in the thick file she'd placed on the podium. No one expected what came next, not merely a disciplinary action, but a full-scale reckoning, ruthless and necessary, like the surgical removal of a long-festering tumor to save a decaying body. Lieutenant Carl Mason, Officer Deborah Lung, step forward. The mention of those 2 names startled many in the room. Carl was the team leader of Tactical Unit 5, who had worked alongside Liam for over a decade. Deborah was an internal affairs inspector, responsible for citizen complaint reviews. Yet she had 18 case files returned with no explanation. Both of them twitched slightly, but they had no choice. They stepped forward, slowly, heavily, as if fully aware of what was coming. Callista didn't draw it out. She cited Article 27C, relating to obstruction and interference in internal investigations, then declared that both individuals would be placed on a 60-day suspension, barred from accessing investigative materials, and subjected to oversight by the newly established Ethics Review Task Force, a team reporting directly to the Office of the Chief of Police under her command. This task force, Callista said clearly, will re-examine all citizen complaints from 2018 to the present, 1,346 case files. Anyone found to have mishandled, distorted, or buried evidence will be held accountable. No exceptions. The air in the room turned colder than the AC could explain. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at colleagues, as if awakening from a long, collective delusion. Callista continued, her tone slower now, but no less intense. Last year, according to data from the mayor's office, 68% of all citizen complaints in Greenville involved discriminatory or threatening behavior by officers. Only 4% were officially processed. Do you believe that's the people's fault? There was no need for an answer. Her gaze alone made every person in that room feel the heat rise along their spine. Then came the part that made many eyes widen. The introduction of 2 new deputies, names that hadn't appeared in any previous appointment rounds. The first was Martha Delaney, a former special investigator from the state of New Jersey. known for exposing a cover-up of racial bias within the Newark police force in 2020, which led to over 22 senior officers being dismissed. The second was Raymond Hill, a black former chief inspector from Illinois, who had brought a group of officers to trial for using drones to surveil Asian women, ultimately forcing the state's Internal Security Division to rewrite its oversight protocols. They wore no uniforms, clapped for no one, and only nodded in calm acknowledgement. But their eyes held a severity that no one dared to underestimate. At the back of the room, Liam Walker had now stepped away from the rows of seats. He stood alone, his back against the wall, like someone exiled from the ranks. No one looked at him as a colleague anymore. He was now a living warning to the entire force. Privilege does not shield you from consequence. Then, like a chain reaction, the wave of change began to spread. A veteran officer lowered his head, trembling hands clutching his glasses. A young female officer quietly wiped away tears. And one white lieutenant, who had once opposed reform, sat upright, eyes forward, as if, for the first time, he believed the honor of policing might yet be salvageable. The meeting ended without applause, only the scratch of pens signing paperwork and the heavy shuffle of feet exiting the room. That very afternoon, 3 temporary resignation letters were placed on the desk of Callista Carter's secretary. No lengthy explanations. Those who submitted them knew, either leave in silence or be dragged into the light by the unrelenting hand of the woman they once dismissed. The meeting ended, but Callista did not leave the precinct. While most officers had already dispersed and gone home, she quietly returned to her office, a room still carrying the scent of fresh paint, with a desk yet to display any family photos, and a wall clock that still ran 5 minutes slow. But one thing wasn't delayed: the willpower of this woman to act. On her desk lay a file over 300 pages thick, Liam Walker's record. Stamped, confidential internal circulation. The document had been passed back and forth between 3 departments over the past 2 years, with no one daring to dig deeper. But now, under Callista's hand, each page began to turn. Not like a bureaucrat sifting through paperwork, but like a forensic pathologist dissecting the cadaver of a broken system. She scanned through the list of official complaints, 12 cases spanning from 2015 to 2023. But the anomaly wasn't in the number. It was in the small red text at the bottom. 4 case files missing, cause unknown. Meanwhile, 3 others were marked insufficient evidence, despite clearly noting video provided by civilian witnesses. Armed with the resolve of someone who had led multiple state-level internal investigations, Callista didn't hesitate. She called the North Carolina Independent Inspector's Office directly, requesting that all files related to Liam Walker be reopened under her authority as Greenville's new chief of police. A priority order was triggered, effective within 24 hours. That same afternoon, a video thought to be permanently lost from 2021 was recovered, thanks to the cloud archive of a human rights organization. In the footage, Liam is seen stopping the car of a Mexican man named Diego Hernandez, demanding that he delete a video that captured officers violently restraining a young boy. When Diego refused, Liam threatened deportation and illegally searched his belongings. Callista immediately contacted Diego, now living on the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The call lasted 42 minutes. After a brief moment of hesitation, Diego agreed to provide a notarized written statement, along with a copy of the original video that he had been coerced into deleting. But she didn't stop there. While examining internal records, Callista discovered that 3 team-level officers, all of whom had worked directly with Liam, had signed off on canceling incident reports in at least 5 cases involving citizen complaints. One of them was Lieutenant Barry Wells, previously commended for upholding internal discipline. Each signature, each report was cross-referenced with duty logs, timesheets, and citizen testimony. Slowly, a fractured picture emerged, a network of concealed misconduct, sustained by collective silence. She marked 17 suspicious entries, compiling them into a preliminary 14-page report and sending it directly to the Internal Audit Division, with a request for an independent investigation to be launched within 21 days, as stipulated under Departmental Ethics Protocol 46A. Still, Callista did not stop. By 8 p.m., with most staff already gone, she quietly made her way alone down to the basement archives, long treated as the graveyard of truth. There, in drawer 34E, she pulled out a dust-covered file. Tyrell Boone, 16 years old. Serious injuries sustained during detention, 2020. The teen had suffered a fractured jaw and long-term psychological trauma. His family had filed a lawsuit, but the case was quickly dismissed due to lack of evidence, even though 3 civilian witnesses had been listed. In the file, a faint note read, "Responding Officer, L. Walker." That night, Callista did not go home. A light rain fell over Greenville, but the chief's office remained lit until 1:48 a.m. On her screen, video clips replayed over and over. She typed the final lines of her 26-page report and gave it a simple title: "Start Again." Less than 24 hours after the historic meeting on the 6th floor of the Greenville Police Department, a headline appeared on the front page of the Greenville Times. "New Police Chief Suspends Officer for Racial Discrimination" on her first day in office. The article spread like wildfire in a city long accustomed to empty promises and half-hearted reforms. But this time, people felt something truly shifting. Local television networks like GVN 24, WHC Channel 7, and even Charlotte's WNCB sent reporters to Greenville to investigate. Evening broadcasts opened with panel discussions. Callista Carter, whistleblower or tradition breaker? Some human rights advocates called her the first woman brave enough to hold a mirror to the gut of Greenville's police force. Within 3 days, her name had been mentioned over 11,000 times across social media platforms, from Facebook and TikTok to Reddit. But as with any major reform, the antibodies began to respond. On Main Street, a small group of about 25, mostly former officers and members of the Police Tradition Alliance, held signs protesting, "Don't let outsiders destroy internal trust and protect white values." Anonymous posts on internal forums described Callista as dangerous, reckless, and having a personal issue with white people. Callista gave no interviews. She posted no rebuttals. She left only one sentence in her office, written on a whiteboard beside the door. "Not everyone who stands against you is your enemy. But silence in the face of injustice is complicity." A week later, action followed action. Callista released the Greenville Police Ethical Conduct Handbook, a mandatory code of 10 principles, approved under internal legal authority. These weren't just recommendations. They formed the basis for evaluating, disciplining, and holding officers accountable. Article 4 stated clearly, "Any officer who witnesses abuse of power and fails to report it within 24 hours will be considered complicit." She also established a community behavior monitoring station right on the precinct's first floor, where residents could submit videos, audio recordings, or direct complaints about misconduct they witnessed. Within 1 week, over 147 submissions came in, 28 dashboard cam videos, 14 phone recordings, and 9 cases already met the criteria for investigation. Change even found its way into the education system. High schools across the city, supported by the local government, hosted a seminar called Meet Police Chief Callista Carter, where students were free to ask unfiltered, unscreened questions. At Eastland High School, A black 8th grade boy named Malik Johnson raised his hand, voice trembling. "Are you scared? Doing things that others have avoided for so many years." Callista smiled, then leaned gently toward the mic. She didn't pause long. "Yes, I'm scared every day, but I fear silence more." That answer, just one moment in a 90-minute seminar, was shared more than 2 million times by the next morning, by students, journalists, and citizens across the state. The hashtag number sign, Stand with Callista, began to spread, not as a fleeting viral trend, but as a declaration of survival for those buried in the silence of the system. At the same time, the mayor's office received 312 thank you emails from families who had once filed complaints and never received a response. Many said it was the first time they felt their voices had reached someone who truly listened. Greenville wasn't just stirred, it was burning with fever, and Callista Carter wasn't a sedative. She was the strongest antibiotic the city's broken body had ever received. 7 days after being stripped of authority in that fateful morning meeting, Liam Walker officially received a summons for an internal disciplinary hearing, signed by 3 members of the Ethics Oversight Board, the final signature belonging to none other than Police Chief Callista Carter. His suspension was upgraded to full restriction, salary frozen, system access revoked, and precinct entry badge deactivated. Instead of self-reflection, Liam flailed in panic. In a desperate attempt to salvage the remnants of his reputation, he hired attorney Charles Dempsey, a prominent figure in conservative legal circles, known for defending officers in occupational overreach cases. Dempsey didn't plead for leniency. He turned the incident into a full-blown political saga. "My client is the victim of a politically motivated purge disguised as reform, a white man targeted simply for not bowing to this new moral trend." But that defense collapsed the moment Callista submitted 4 video recordings, 12 witness affidavits, 7 prior complaints, and 3 previously buried files, all fully recovered and legally certified. Among them was a 2021 clip showing Liam slamming a flashlight on Diego Hernandez's car hood, saying, "Delete the video or I'll call ICE." Immigration enforcement never came, but the fear drove Diego to flee the state within a week. The hearing lasted exactly 17 minutes. No arguments, no lengthy testimonies. All 5 board members voted to expel Liam from the police force, permanently, with no right to appeal. In under 30 minutes, Liam Walker, once the commanding officer of Greenville's West District, was reduced to a former officer with a Grade C ethics rating, the lowest possible on the department's internal scale. He applied for jobs at 3 private security firms in the city. 2 politely declined, citing cultural misalignment. The 3rd responded bluntly via email, "We do not hire individuals who have been terminated for verified acts of racial discrimination." The press didn't let up. The Greenville Weekly ran a bold headline, "Walker Out, the Cost of a Contemptuous Glare." WNCB aired interviews with 3 past victims, including Tyrell Boone, now 19, and a freshman studying criminal justice. For the first time, Tyrell recounted the incident from when he was 16, his voice trembling on camera. "I thought my life ended that day, but today, I know justice can come back to life." Online communities gave Liam a new name, the last face of the dark era. Those who had once defended him fell silent, quietly deleting old posts or pivoting the conversation toward the right to forgiveness. 1 week after the hearing, Liam left Greenville. No farewell party. No colleagues checking in. He departed in silence, his face hidden under a baseball cap, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a few worn clothes. When asked about Liam in a local radio interview, Callista simply smiled, her voice calm. He was never the personal issue. He was a symptom. a clear sign of what's been festering in the system for far too long. And that symptom has now been removed. Not through revenge, not through slogans, but through preparation, persistence, and truth restored in full. To Callista Carter, Liam Walker was never the destination. He was merely the first step in cleansing a machine long corroded by arrogance and bias. 3 months since Callista Carter walked into the Greenville Police Department, not to a welcome, but to skeptical glances and doubtful stares, the entire city could now feel a distinct shift. The hallways that once echoed with complicit silence now rang with honest conversations. The chairs that had long borne the weight of irresponsible power were now accountable to a transparent and unyielding oversight system. At the start of her second quarter in office, Callista officially organized the statewide Law Enforcement Reform Summit, held at the Greenville Convention Center. It was the first time in North Carolina's history that a reform summit was initiated by a sitting police chief, not by federal mandates or career politicians. Over 12 major police departments from neighboring states like Georgia, Tennessee, and South Carolina sent representatives to attend. The summit wasn't about optics. It tackled painful subjects such as bias in patrol patterns, the silence of internal witnesses, and the citizen's role in monitoring power. The summit's resounding success caught the attention of the U.S. Department of Justice. A month later, Callista was invited to join the National Advisory Task Force to help design the community policing, restorative justice model. This was a federal initiative backed by over $80 million in pilot funding. And Greenville, a city once labeled a moral black hole, had now become a proving ground. But it was the numbers that truly stunned the public. The complaint rate against Greenville officers dropped by 47% within just 90 days. The percentage of citizens who agreed they trust the city's police force rose from 31% to 68%, according to a University of Carolina survey. Callista never celebrated herself, but by the 4th month, at the Breakthrough Leadership Medal ceremony hosted by the National Police Association, she was described as the woman who didn't just change procedures, but changed belief. At that event, she unexpectedly reunited with Tyrell Boone, the young man once brutalized by police, whose file Callista had personally restored. Now a sophomore law student at Duke University, Tyrell simply said one line, which moved the entire room. "You gave back dignity to so many like me." Callista took his hand, her eyes calm. "You're the one who'll give it back to the next generation." Inside the department, those who once kept their distance now respectfully called her Chief C. Officers said that when she entered a room, no one needed scolding. Just one look, not angry but fair, was enough to make the team sit up straighter. She didn't instill fear. She sparked self-respect. Callista's story even transcended law enforcement. 2 universities, Harvard and Morehouse, formally included the case study, Callista Carter and the Greenville Overhaul, in their Master of Public Administration curriculum on leadership and systemic reform. In a year-end interview on CNN's Leaders Who Shift Nations, the host asked, "What moment stands out most from your first 3 months?" Callista paused a few seconds, then answered in a soft but unwavering voice, "The moment I stepped into that meeting room, and the entire room froze. Not because of me, but because the truth had finally arrived." She smiled, looked directly into the camera, not with bravado, not with slogans, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had weathered storms and never lost direction. There is no justice that lasts forever, unless someone dares to stand for it. That sentence spread like a slow-burning fire, not loud, but powerful enough to light up the darkest corners. And in Greenville, that flame of justice, had been reignited by one woman. With courage, intellect, and an unshakable loyalty to the truth. Callista Carter wasn't just a police chief. She was a woman rewriting how an entire system viewed itself, and she was only getting started. Finally, something had begun to change. Join us in sharing meaningful stories by hitting the like button and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with powerful lessons and genuine empathy.